I'm going to move straight on to what I felt God was speaking to me about. I've been looking at Psalms since Howard died, and when I read Psalm 8 and listened to the teaching on it God said to me, "This is what you're preaching on," because I didn't have a clue when I offered to do this Sunday. I offered before Howard became so ill too, so there was nothing there to sort of call on really. So I'm looking particularly at Psalm 8, verses 1 to 4, and I'll just read it to you now. How majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory in the heavens. Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies, to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? And when I looked at this, I thought, well, I can't preach on that because I've never had any understanding of the universe. I can look at an empty room and I can design it in my head. I know where the furniture goes. I know what colours I want. I can see in 3D as long as it doesn't move around. But as soon as I think about the universe and things rotating in different directions and the whole time aspect of it, I'm lost, totally lost. And then I thought, Nigel knows about it. So Nigel's going to talk a bit about the universe, and I want you to look at it in the concept of God created this. This is our magnificent God, and then I'll follow that up afterwards.
Well, yes, the universe is really big. I mean, it's astonishing just how big it is. But in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So, just have a quick look at some of the heavens. Some might recognise that is the Andromeda Galaxy. It's a picture taken by the Hubble Space Telescope, actually, and it's looking a bit fuzzy up there on my computer screen. It looks really clear. It is. It's amazing. You are looking at, well, if the whole thing is there, 200 billion stars. It is vast. It's also quite a long way away. It's 2 million light years away. A light year is how far light travels in a year. It's the other way of looking at it is you're looking at it 2 million years ago. And it is huge. But it's a little smudge when you look at the sky. You can just about make it out on a very clear day somewhere in the area of the Orion constellation, I think. And the Hubble telescope was named after Edwin Hubble, who was an American astronomer in the early 20th century. And he was the guy who came up with the evidence for the expanding universe and realised that these things were not just little smudges amongst the stars, they were actually a very long way away. And the idea of redshift is that the further away things are, the redder they look in the sky. I've got another verse here, which is Romans 1, verse 20. Since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. And he's made that. And it is vast. I've got another picture. This is also the Hubble Space Telescope. It's not like that one. In the early days, you may remember the Hubble Space Telescope wasn't working properly. When they fixed it, this is about 30 years ago now, one guy on the Hubble team wanted to point the Hubble Space Telescope at the emptiest bit of sky they could find. And he was poo-pooed. He said, "I can't possibly do that." Anyway, the next Christmas came along, and they all got a knocking off for a few days. So he persuaded them to point the Hubble Space Telescope at the emptiest piece of space they could find. And they went off for Christmas, having opened the aperture for about 5 days. They came back, and that is what they found. You look at the emptiest bit of space, there are more galaxies there all of those blobs are fuzzy galaxies, a bit like that picture of the Andromeda galaxy we saw at the beginning. It is just vast, but God created it. He is bigger than everything we can see. You probably heard of the James Webb Space Telescope, which only went up in the last few months, and they did the same thing. By the way, the starburst things are actually stars that have got in the way. They're in our own galaxy, probably. But it's the fuzzy objects in the background, in various colours. They are more galaxies. And the stretched out ones, the ones that seem to be sort of falling apart, that's a byproduct of something Einstein discovered, that light can be bent by physical objects. So the light from those galaxies has passed close by something big in the sky, probably another galaxy, which has caused that stretching out effect. And that is even further back. If you remember, the Webb Space Telescope is specifically designed to look at the infrared, the light that sort of we can't quite see. It's the other side of red. As I mentioned earlier on, everything, the further away you are, the more red-shifted things get. So they designed the Webb Space Telescope specifically to look at infrared light. And you're looking back to the 13 billion years, 13 billion light years away, 13 billion years ago, on those galaxies, the light from them came out to reach us. It is vast. But as I said, God is vaster. He created it. Awesome.
Yeah. Sum the universe up, thank you.
Okay, there you are. The universe.
Right, there's sort of two themes to this sermon. One is God, the powerful creator, and God as our loving Father. I'm taking the first two verses. I'm looking at, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory in the heavens. And I think the first thing David made clear was that God wasn't just the God of the Jews. It was more than just Israel. He was the God of the Jews and the Gentiles. His name is excellent throughout the whole earth. And then you've set your glory above the heavens. At the same time, the earth is not big enough to measure the glory and excellence of God. And we've looked at the vastness of the universe, and it's too big for me to comprehend. But God's glory is above that. What does glory mean? Glory can mean fame, grandeur, greatness, magnificence, splendour. And in the Bible it often means the manifestation of God's presence as perceived by humans. So it's the bit, in a sense, that we can imagine or we can see. God is bigger than all of that. In Exodus 33 and 34, Moses went up the mountain to meet God, to receive the Ten Commandments for the second time. The first time they got broken. He wanted to be in God's presence to see his glory, but God told him to hide, and he would walk past, and he would not be able to look directly at God, because God would protect him. He would only be able to look at his back view. However, when he came back from the mountain, the people could see his face absolutely glowing, to such an extent that he had to put a veil on his face. So that was him not actually looking at God, but being in the presence of God. That's how strong his glory was. And yet our understanding, I think, of how God is so limited. And the universe is just a small expression of who God is. Verse 3 says, through the praise of children and nursing infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemy to silence the foe and the avenger. This is quite difficult, I think, to understand. David considered the greatness of God by the evident power and glory in creation, both across the earth and the heavens. Now he considers the power of the glory of God can be seen in small children, babies and nursing infants, as God's strength is evident in them. When I was at university, I did a human biology degree. I went to a lecture. I don't know what they called it, but I called it in my mind the miracle of birth. And the whole lecture was on all the things that have to happen to get a baby from the womb outside in the world. All the things that have to happen so quickly. And I'll just give you a taste of it. Newborn babies go through many physical changes when they're first born. The most dramatic change at birth is when the newborn baby takes its first breath. The lungs inflate and fill the air sacs within the lungs and gas exchange begins. A newborn baby's first breath will be the most difficult of their life. The initial baby's breath will fluctuate between 15 and 100 breaths per minute, and after a few minutes it will settle down to 35 to 50 per minute. The first breath triggers changes in the function of the heart. Special ducts and blood vessels that were essential to the baby's cardiovascular system whilst in the womb close rapidly because they're no longer needed. Blood flow through the umbilical cord drops to nothing once the umbilical cord is clamped. And then there are just so many changes inside the baby. That's a taste of it. And all this has to happen within a few minutes. Sorry. It's not cold, I've just got one irritating cough. I was at the, obviously I had 2 children of my own, but I was at the birth of both my 3 children born to my daughter. And it's a messy proceedings giving birth and painful, and it wasn't easy for her because she was severe back problems. It is a miracle, absolute miracle, and there's all the sort of trauma when the baby comes out as to what might be wrong or right and what they're having to deal with immediately, but it's just amazing. And I remember sitting in that lecture thinking, how do people say all this happened by accident? How do they not believe that there was a creating God that had a plan, that organised all this, for it all to happen? David also touched on a familiar theme in the Bible, the idea that God uses otherwise weak things to display his glory. There's a verse in Corinthians that says that God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things that are mighty. And it's hard to think of anything more weak than a baby, and yet the same God who can ordain strength out of the mouth of babies and nursing infants can give strength and support to us too, in the midst of our weakness. And Jesus, I think, made this clear to the people that were watching him in the temple in Matthew. He was in a temple area and he just cleared out the money changers and the cheaters and the market stall holders because he didn't approve of what they were doing in the house of prayer. And he told them this should be a house of prayer but not a den of robbers. And then he went on in a healing ministry to the people there that needed healing. And the children round him called out, Hosanna to the Son of David, which was quite profound that they recognised who he was. And as he received that praise, the chief priests and teachers were angry. They questioned Jesus, do you hear what those children are saying? Jesus referred to this psalm by saying, have you not read, from the lips of children and infants, Lord, you have called forth your praise. And the reason why Jesus and God displays his strength in unlikely vessels is because it works to silence the enemy. Satan and his fellow adversaries have nothing to say when God uses a weak person so mightily. And you can see that in the Bible loads of times. He picks on, I think it was Moses, who didn't feel he was a good speaker and therefore he needed help to speak. Job was being accused by Satan and the others, and yet God sustained him through that. And we've seen how mighty Job moved through his time of weakness and vulnerability into a better life afterwards. There's David and Goliath the big warrior, giant warrior, David the little shepherd. And I remember abseiling in North Wales. I was about 40, I think, and it was November, it was bitterly cold, it was wet. I don't know why I was there, but I'd gone to help with some students. And they were a mixture of students from different courses, teenagers, all post 16. And we were at the side of this mountain, looking down, this drizzling rain, and we were going to abseil down it. I'd abseiled before, so I wasn't particularly terrified. I found it easier than other things we did. And there was a group of lads, all sort of macho, jostling each other as to who's going to go first and all this business, while none of them wanted to go first. And then this lad from the special needs department had a muscle weakness, had a peculiar gait when he walked, had some learning difficulties. he marched to the front and he said, I'll go first because I've done this before and I really enjoy it. Stuck on his harness and off he went. And these guys, it's just a picture, their mouths dropped open. It was, one of them said, well, we've all got to do it now, haven't we? And it was just wonderful, and it was very much, he was probably the weakest physically of the group there, and yet he showed such strength of mind when he did that. And it's a bit like when we're in church and we hear somebody who's going through a troubled time, or maybe a new Christian, speak from the heart and saying what God is doing through them or to them at that time. And that has, for me, and probably for most of you, that has way more impact sometimes than the fluent, what Howard would have called the professional Christian, who's got the Bible teaching and been a Christian for years and spoken from the front for years. That the fact that God can touch people's lives and really move them wherever they are at the time. It goes on to verse 4. When I consider your heavens and the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you've ordained. I think Nigel's more than covered that. But then it says, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you visit him? And that's the huge contrast, I think, as far as God is concerned. What does the word mindful mean? I think one of the things that I look at it as is considering the greatness of the heavens also made David consider the relative smallness and insignificance of man. And David wondered why such a great big God would be mindful of such a small being. And God is so big that he made the universe with his fingers, and he's so small that he's dwarfed by the universe. Yet David did not doubt that God was mindful of him, and only wondered why he was. What is mindful? I sort of pictured Stay and Play, where you've got a group of women, we often have up to maybe 10, 12, and a number of them have got 2 children. I think we had 4 babies, really small babies last time I did it. But when you talk to the adults, you don't really have a proper conversation, you have limited conversations, because they've got half their mind on what their children are doing, and especially if they've got a baby in arms. So you have a conversation, but they're constantly sort of, what are they doing now, where are they? And then there's a lady there, it was better last time, but the time before, who's got a new baby, and she's got a very little girl who's just got a will of her own, really, and if she sees a toy she wants, she goes and gets it, and it doesn't matter if another child is playing with it quite happily, she goes and she grabs it and she gets it. So she causes sort of, and then she'll play with it for 2 or 3 minutes and then she'll move on. And she's got the concentration of a flea. But she causes disruption, really, because some children, once they've got a toy, sometimes it's their own toy, they don't want to let go. And usually mothers step in and say, come on, share, or no, she was playing with that first, why don't you play with this? But this mother doesn't seem to notice. And so she's not mindful of her child. I think it was better last time, so whether she's going to be more mindful, I'm not sure. But it's very obvious, those that are and those that aren't. And I think that's where God is. It's a bit like, when you're counselling, you've got to do active listening. It's not just enough to hear, but you've actually got to be with that person while they're talking. And I think mindfulness is the same. You've got to actually look, observe, and care about that person, ready to step in, ready to hold their hand, ready to lift them up, ready to push them out of the way if they're going in the wrong direction. And that's what God is for us. He is mindful of each one of us. And I think, sometimes we do feel, our problems in a sense don't matter. We look at the news, we read the paper, and we see there are so many people that are so much worse than us. Their situations are dire, and ours aren't. We live in, we're comfortable, we're fed with water, we've got housing, we've got enough warm clothes, even if it's cold in the room. But others are without fuel at the moment. They've lost all their fuel. And so we don't think maybe our problems are that significant. But we all have problems in our lives. And I just want to finish with a word of prophecy that I was given a few years ago. I went to a Fresh Streams conference where they were discussing prophecy. And I went forward for prayer because I had concerns for a number of close relatives in my family that were seriously unwell. and having to cope. I felt I was going to have to cope with all of the loss all in 1 year, and I didn't feel prepared for it. And at that time, my dad had passed away, but my mum was alive, late 80s, very frail. My younger sister had pancreatic cancer, and my husband had a number of serious health issues, and my daughter had stage 4 cancer. And sometimes that knowledge was overwhelming. And I was given a word from God by a guy I didn't know at all. And he said that God was like my log burner. And I think the conference was in January. It was cold time of year, so that was actually quite significant in itself. It was like my log burner, providing what I needed. And beside the burner was a never-ending pile of logs that were never going to run out. God was my provider, whatever life brought me. And I can honestly say that God has brought me through the death of my mum, my sister, and now current. And He's still with me. And I think, I know from personal experience that God can be with you through difficult times, can sustain you, can keep your head above water. And I don't know what the rest of my life is going to be like, but I do know that He will stay with me. And I'm emotional. But I just want you to know from this service that we've got a mighty God, and He can sustain us, and He can be with us every day of the week. Right, we'll finish with the blessing. Let's say the blessing together. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ,